We are on page 284 at the bottom, subparagraph 15. And we were talking about the level of faith and belief in Hashem that the saintly person possesses. We talked last week about multiple levels of perspective in Emunah, just as a way of scratching the surface on the very deep subject of what faith really means. But to continue our discussion in the Kuzari, we are continuing the text on the bottom of page 284. And Rabbi Yehuda Halevi writes that when the saintly person ponders all the above with respect to all of his own actions, meaning that he thinks about how he's really, his body is a wondrous thing, and that so many aspects of his physical function really work on autopilot because Hashem is in charge of his body and making sure that everything that works in my body is working. And I can send mental commands to different parts of my body and they listen to me automatically, and so many of these, the amazing aspects of the human body are incredible. When he thinks about all of these things, he will certainly devote all of his activity to God, who created his organs and continuously maintains them so that they operate optimally. Because of this, it is as if the divine presence is with him constantly, and the angels are accompanying him, albeit in a dormant, covert fashion. So he really feels like he's surrounded by this entourage of angelic beings who are really there at the direction of the divine. If he strengthens his piety and visits or resides in places in Eretz Yisrael, as the commentaries write, that are worthy of the divine presence, then the angels will actively and overtly accompany him. If you're in a place which is not so holy, so you feel this entourage of angels, but they're dormant. But you can elevate that sense if you go to holy places like in Eretz Yisrael. Then you can actually feel a greater sense of presence of these angels. He will see them face to face on a level just below prophecy. This was how the leading sages during the Second Temple era saw images and heard heavenly voices, what we call the Bas Kol. Bat Kol. The Bat Kol. Have you heard of a Bat Kol?
Head. No. Bat Kol is... No.
Bat Kol.
It's like a head is echo, and Bat Kol.
Kol is a sound or a voice.
No, Bat Kol is really like a head. It's like a echo.
Is that what it is in modern Hebrew?
Uh-huh.
Because the term Bat Kol literally means the daughter of a voice, right? But what it refers to is a divine announcement that a holy person can hear. And sometimes a community of people can hear this voice or this sound emanating from heaven. This is the term that the sages refer to when they want to talk about a level of connection with divine communication that's not prophecy, but it's close to prophecy. Another term that's used is Ruach HaKodesh, or divine inspiration. But the actual description of the voice that is heard through Ruach HaKodesh is called the Bas Kol. You haven't heard that Hasidic song called Bas Kol?
It is echo. In Hebrew, it's echo.
It's an echo. Okay. But you see, that's an example of how modern Hebrew derives from the Talmud. So they attained the level of saintliness. You know that song Bas Kol? Have you heard that song on YouTube or anything?
Not from those two words.
No.
I wouldn't know.
It's one of these, a group of Hasidim put together a song that's based on some hip-hop R&B song. And it basically is a riff on the line that 40 days before conception, or actually 40 days before the formation of the fetus in the womb, a heavenly voice goes forth and says, so-and-so will marry so-and-so. Bas Kol. Okay. I'll play it for you later. Okay. They attain the level of saintliness, and prophecy is the level above it. In the presence of the divinity, the saintly person behaves in the same reverent manner as a servant would behave in the presence of his master. This is even more the case when the master, namely God, created him, has always treated him well, and is watching him with an eye to reward or punish him. So this person, the saintly person, sort of continues, snowballs in his piety when he comes to the realization that he is surrounded by the divine presence itself, and he hears this heavenly voice. Now, this idea is foreign to us because we don't have these kinds of experiences. I mean, unless, at least I don't. Maybe someone in the room has had some kind of spiritual experience. But most people don't have those experiences. The Ramchal, if you just want to get an example of where you find this term Bas Kol in the Talmud, I gave you one example a moment ago. But that's where a heavenly voice emanates that is not necessarily audible to anyone. The Gemara in Eruvin tells us that Shalosh Shanim, this is in source number 2 in the sheet I just gave you. Shalosh Shanim nechlaku beit Shammai ubeit Hillel. That for a total of 3 years, or the better part of 3 years, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel had disputations about various halachot. And it was during that 3-year period where we find most of the classic debates between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Halalu omrim halacha kamosnu, v'halalu omrim halacha kamosnu. Each side presented its arguments over this very long period to demonstrate why the law should be like them. Yatsa a Bas Kol va'amra, so a heavenly voice emanated forth to the congregation that was debating these issues and said, Elu va'elu divrei Elokim chayim. That should be, have you ever heard that quote before? Elu va'elu divrei Elokim chayim. These and those, both sides are the words of the living God. V'halacha kebeit Hillel. But nevertheless, the law is like Beit Hillel. And then the Gemara goes on and explains what that means. But this is just an example of where we receive testimony from the Talmud itself, at least at face value. The meaning of this is that there was an audible sound, at least to the people that were in that room. Maybe not audible to anybody else, but the people in that room could hear a heavenly voice cry forth, the law is like Beit Hillel. Could it be metaphor? Possible. But this is the standard understanding of what a Bat Kol is. The other famous example is the story of Rabbi Eliezer in Bava Metzia, in the story of the Tachnur Shel Achnai, which we've discussed, we've referenced a number of times, where there's this famous dispute about a certain kind of oven that can be assembled and disassembled and assembled again, whether it is subject to the laws of purity and impurity. Technical law. That's not the issue right now, but the rabbis said one opinion and Rabbi Eliezer said another opinion. And Rabbi Eliezer was the more lenient opinion, and he was insistent that the law was like him. And he cried out, if the law is like me, then let the water of this brook prove it. And the water of the brook flowed upstream instead of downstream. And the rabbis were unimpressed. And then Rabbi Eliezer said, if the law is like me, let the tree outside of this room prove it. And the tree uprooted itself and traveled several cubits and replanted itself on the ground. The rabbis were unimpressed. And then Rabbi Eliezer said, if the law is like me, let the walls of this very hall in which we're studying, this base medrash, let the walls themselves prove it. And the wall started to cave in. And Rabbi Hoshua, his opponent, rebuked the walls and made them stop. And then finally we come into this is where we are in the story, in the Gemara in Bava Metzia Daf Nun Tes. Chazar va'amar lahem, Rabbi Eliezer then said, Im halacha kemosi min hashamayim yochichu. If the law is like me, let the heavens themselves prove my point. Yatsasa Bas Kol va'amra, Bas Kol emanated forth and stated, Malachem etzel Rabbi Eliezer shahalacha kemoso b'chol makom. Why are you disputing Rabbi Eliezer? After all, the law is like him in all places. And therefore, even heaven itself reverberated a confirmation of the law being like Rabbi Eliezer. Amad Rabbi Yeshua Raglav Amar Lo Bashamaymi. And Rabbi Yeshua discounted the law, the Bas Kol, and he said, sorry, we don't paskin halacha based on heavenly pronouncements. Which is very strange, you would think, right?
It's all from heaven.
Ah, the written Torah is from heaven. The rabbinic tradition, right, was given to man. Hashem says, basically, once I gave you the Torah at Mount Sinai, legislation of areas of ambiguity that are not specifically and explicitly addressed by the Torah itself have to be arbitrated by the rabbis, and you go according to the majority rule. So basically, Rabbi Yeshua was saying, sorry, Hashem, you don't have a vote. And they went along with the majority vote, which was against Rabbi Eliezer and against the Bas Kol. In any event, that's all incidental to our discussion today. I just wanted to demonstrate a couple of citations from the Talmud itself where the Bas Kol is invoked. And this is the Bas Kol that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is referring to here, that a pious individual can actually sometimes hear a heavenly voice ringing in his ear and giving him information. The Ramchal in Derech Hashem wants to clarify for us that the Bas Kol is not meant as a prophecy. It's a level lower than prophecy, and really there's a continuum. It's not like you're either a regular person or you're a prophet. There can be levels in between, so that even if you don't actually attain the level of prophecy for whatever reason, either because you live in the wrong generation, or you're in the wrong place, or you're in the wrong community, nevertheless it is possible to achieve near prophetic levels by getting certain kinds of communiques from heaven. There is something even in secular literature. You ever heard the term eureka? Right, which is based on an ancient Greek philosopher who was sitting in the bathtub one day pondering a very deep philosophical idea, and all of a sudden he sees, I think it had to do with water displacement and science, right? And all of a sudden he realizes the solution to his problem, and he shouts out, that was his name was Eureka, and he says, I've got it. And he ran outside, not realizing he wasn't wearing anything. And that's the famous story. But what is that? That's the light bulb that goes off in our head. So there are two ways to understand that light bulb that goes off in our head. One way of understanding it is that it's a natural process of thought. Our intellects try to process information, and on a scientific level, and just a purely rational level, many times the brain works in the background, just like a computer processes in the background. Without even our being aware of it, ideas are being integrated in our mind so that before we know it, even though we were clueless 5 minutes ago, all of a sudden the clouds clear and we're able to see things with clarity. A solution just manifests itself in our minds. A rationalist will tell you, well, that's of course, your mind was busy processing in your subconscious, and before you were aware of it, your mind put together through its neurons firing, it put together different ideas until it fed you that information, and then it came to the forefront of your consciousness, and that's how you found the solution. The mystic, which Rabbi Yehuda Halevi clearly is, says that this is not, sometimes this can happen through your own intellect, but other times it actually happens through divine intervention. That heaven itself can sometimes provide you with solutions that you would not normally have been able to achieve on your own. So many times, and this happens a lot when you're learning in the Beis Medrash, when you're learning when you're learning Torah intensively, and you're going over a very difficult piece of Gemara, and you're looking at a Tosfos, and you seem to be clueless as to what the true meaning of this Tosfos is, or a very, very difficult kasha, a very difficult question, and you ponder and you ponder and you ponder to the point where you become oblivious to your physical surroundings, and you've just immersed yourself completely into this intellectual realm. And then all of a sudden, like out of nowhere, the solution manifests. So, according to the Ramchal and according to Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, sometimes that happens because Hashem is rewarding you with divine knowledge because of your piety and your effort to be able to arrive at a solution to something that will lead to some holy result. And Ramchal says this. This is in Derech Hashem, section 3, chapter 2. And he says, God ordained that man should naturally be able to teach himself, understand, and reason with his intellect, and thus gain knowledge from his observation of things and their properties. On the basis of this, man is also able to infer and deduce things that are not immediately apparent, and can thus gain a more complete understanding of things. This is the natural process of human reason. God also decreed, however, and this is all Aryeh Kaplan's translation, who was a master translator, God also decreed, however, that there exists another means of gaining knowledge that is much higher than this. This is what we call bestowed enlightenment. Bestowed enlightenment consists of an influence granted by God through various particular means especially prepared for this purpose. When this influence reaches an individual's mind, certain information becomes fixed in it. He perceives this knowledge clearly without any doubt or error, and knows it completely with all its propositions and corollaries as well as its place in the general scheme. This is called divine inspiration, what we call Ruach HaKodesh. In this manner, one can gain knowledge of things otherwise accessible to human reason, but in a much clearer way, as discussed above. On the other hand, one can also gain information that could not be otherwise gained through natural means. This includes such things as information concerning future events and hidden secrets. This experience, however, can take place on many different levels. These may involve the power of its influence, the time when it is granted, the manner in which it reaches the individual, and the nature of the things revealed and communicated in this fashion. In every case, however, the influence comes in such a manner that its recipient is clearly aware of it. But it's also possible that such influence can be extended to a person's mind so that he can clearly perceive a given concept without his being aware of this influence. In such a case, it is experienced like any other idea that arises spontaneously in one's mind. In a broader sense, this is also called divine inspiration or hidden influence in the words of our sages, even though it is actually a much lower level. True divine inspiration, however, is a clear and vivid experience to the one worthy of it, and he is highly aware of its influence. There is another level, however, that is much higher than such divine inspiration. This is the level of true prophecy. And so I believe in this paragraph of the Kuzari, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi was referring to the two levels of what we call Ruach HaKodesh that the Ramchal is referencing. The lower level is when you're outside of Eretz Yisrael, you're not in a holy place, and you just feel that you're being aided by these invisible forces that are granting you some kind of divine inspiration, even though you can't really sense it for sure. The second level is what he called this active and overtly accompanying him and seeing the angels face to face. That's what the Ramchal was referring to as this higher level of Ruach HaKodesh, of really perceiving some inspiration that you know was planted in your mind from a higher source. Now, if you remember the very first part of the Kuzari, those who were here 20 years ago, when we started the Kuzari, you'll recall that this is also a Greek philosophical concept as well, that the philosopher in the Kuzari had made reference to. The philosopher had said that there's something called the active intellect, or the active intelligence, that was discussed among the students of Aristotle in the Arabic world. Aristotle himself made very vague reference to this concept, but it was refined in the medieval period by the Arabic philosophers who viewed themselves as attenuating and extending the teachings of Aristotle. And they said that there's this angelic being or consciousness in the ether called the active intelligence, that any person who strives to attain greater knowledge or greater intellect can tap into. And that's where your eureka moments come in. But this is more of a religious perspective of the active intellect, where it's not just some kind of like radio tower that's constantly transmitting, like the Greeks believed, but rather it's a divine gift that is directly granted to pious people, not just because they're very intellectual, but rather because of their piety. And we had a much more lengthy discussion in the past of some of the different nuances of understanding between the Rambam and Rabbi Yehuda Halevi as far as how people or why people attain divine knowledge. The Rambam felt that it was really just an extension of one's own intellect, not really having to do with piety. And Rabbi Yehuda Halevi more subscribes to, let's say, what we would call, I guess, the more religious view, and not the rationalist view, that it has to do with tzidkus, it has to do with righteousness and piety, more than it has to do with intellectual greatness. Yes?
The word piety could be a whole discussion. So being pious allows one to allow new ideas in. It has something to do with piety, I think, rather than being closed off and purely following the intellectual or the logical. Well, not logical.
Well, right. I mean, right. So the Greeks believed that it has nothing to do with piety. It had nothing to do with righteous behavior. That's what the Greeks believed. It's just they believed that it was, as long as you work hard on your intellectual efforts, you'll eventually have a breakthrough because you'll connect with this radio tower called the active intellect. But Rabbi Yehuda Halevi believes that it's divine intervention once you reach a certain level of righteousness and spiritual greatness, that you have this breakthrough and you are able to see the angels around you who are granted to you because of your holiness, not because of your great intellect. That's the difference. Yes?
When I was in 8th grade, I remember we had an elderly gentleman who was a survivor who unfortunately was relegated to teaching us brats, and he was a big Talmud Chacham, and we were terrible in his class. And every day he would shake his finger at us and say, every day a Bas Kol comes down from Shemayim and says, Oy lahem me'elbonam shel Torah.
It's also a Gemara, yeah.
And that's...
Please translate. Yeah, what does it mean?
Oy to them who...
Woe to man who has disgraced the Torah.
Right,
words,
and
yeah.
he meant us 12-year-olds.
Yes,
because we were brats. And I understood it like... He can hear this.
And that is why we are so messed up to this day. Go ahead, please.
What do you mean?
No, I'm saying, we were traumatized by survivors who were our teachers.
I think he was traumatized by us. Because he had all this wonderful knowledge to impart, but we were just giggling and laughing in his class. Right. And he would say, Oy lahem me'elbonam shel Torah, every day a Bas Kol comes down. And I always remember thinking it was like a dog whistle. He could hear it, but we couldn't.
Let's assume that he did hear it, yes. He was probably this chassid that's being discussed in this paragraph. Okay, well, based on this, do not be surprised that the saintly person declares before even entering the bathroom, be honored and holy divine ministers, give honor to the God of Israel, and depart from me while I enter and do my duty, and then I shall return to you. In other words, look at the tremendous sense of holiness and awareness that a pious person like this has. He recognizes that as he enters into the washroom, he is entering into a place where holy beings that surround him cannot enter. And therefore he quotes this line, which is really just a line from the Gemara in Brachot, which says that a tzadik, when he goes to the bathroom, actually says those words. We don't have that practice anymore. But if you were truly aware that you were being accompanied everywhere you went by holy beings because of your own piety, you would actually say those words before going to the washroom where the angels could not enter. What an amazing concept of awareness, of just awareness. Now, again, the whole idea of angels being spatially confined and coming down to this world is debated within Judaism. Maimonides would look at this and say, oh, this is so provincial and so simplistic. You're not looking at it correctly, because angels appear to you in a vision. They don't come down to the physical world. But Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is part of the mystical tradition, which says that no, you take these ideas literally, that angels exist all around us. And the holier you are, the more you are surrounded by these angels. And the more you can create an awareness of it, the more fortified you'll be, because you'll be constantly aware of the holy surroundings. Shivisi Hashem lenegdi tamid. I'm supposed to place God in my presence all the time. If we were, the Gemara says that the only person who's capable of sinning is a person who is temporarily insane. has temporarily taken leave of their sanity, of their faculties. Because if a person was truly aware of reality at every moment, it would be impossible for them to sin. Because how could I do something I know that I'm not supposed to do in the presence of the Ribono Shel Olam, the presence of the Creator? Yes?
So since obviously we are not on that level or near or close, so the angels that surround us, what kind of angels?
They're smaller ones. They're like, instead of being life-sized, they're like the action figures. I'm just imagining. The point of this exercise is to look with glowing admiration at what man is capable of becoming. Not that we are, and what we should aspire towards. And there actually walked the earth. People like this actually walked the earth. I mean, there were people in earlier generations, as hard as it is for us to relate to even to people a generation ago who were so immersed in Torah study, and how difficult it was for them to relate to us, yes? So imagine going back 10 or 20 or 50 generations and imagining what people were capable of achieving.
I'm just afraid what kind of angels surround me with everything I do or don't do. So I don't feel like really, if because during the day, every time you say something maybe not supposed to or do or whatever, is there an angel to strike me?
Well, I mean, I don't know that the Rabbi Yehuda Levi would want you to dwell on the negative aspect of it when we talk about the angels. The Gemara does say, for every mitzvah, you create an angel that defends you in Shemayim. For every aveira, for every sin, you create a prosecuting angel that comes to argue against you in Shemayim. So there's truth to that as well. Chazal create these imageries in order to incentivize us to do the right thing in life. And so it's sometimes worthwhile to dwell on both the positive and the negative. But Rabbi Yehuda Levi here is dwelling on the positive. Think about all of the wonderful angels that are surrounding you, rooting you on, and hoping that you're going to make the right decisions over the course of the day. That's the way I would look at it, at least for now. Yes?
I'm just saying, like, two questions. If a person is truly a tzadik, then they would be very humble, and they would never think that they're worthy of seeing angels, right? Like they would,
I don't necessarily agree with that statement. Humility is not a lack of self-awareness. Let's just continue talking. That's why I pass this out. What is humility? Humility is awareness of what I am and realizing that I am nothing in the presence of Hashem, or I am nothing compared to what I really could be or should be. But it is not a denial of the reality of what I am and who I am. Yes?
so a tzaddik knows that they're a tzaddik. Like
If-
the big tzaddikim, like Yashav and all these other big tzaddikim that were accepted, they knew that they were who they were.
Presumably so. I cannot tell you for sure in any one individual case, but the presumption is that a tzaddik knows that he's a tzaddik. And he knows that what awesome responsibility that places upon him. Yes?
I just find it hard to understand humility and yet knowing you're a tzaddik. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. If I knew I was a tzaddik, I wouldn't be so humble. But
Moshe Rabbeinu was the humblest man who walked the earth. That's testified to by the Torah itself. Was he not self-aware that he was the only man who was capable in his generation of being the emissary of God to give the Torah? God himself revealed that to him.
but didn't he say, I don't want to do it,
Yes, but nonetheless, he finally took the task upon himself and realized, because God pressed him and said, you're the only person to do this job. And so Moshe did not lose his humility as a result of taking the job. He only added to his humility because he had a much clearer vision of who he was vis-a-vis God. The more we understand what we are and who we are, the more that engenders humility. The people who don't have humility and look at themselves as great people really don't understand who they are. They really have a distorted vision of who they are in the larger scheme of things, and that's why they feel that sense of importance.
Yeah, I mean,
Much more,
nowadays,
yeah.
as people start seeing angels, they'd be considered mentally ill.
Yes, we would say that that person is schizophrenic, yes.
Right.
Yeah. So if you're seeing them, please don't tell me.
Well,